Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. The smell of dish soap clung to my hands as I rinsed a single plate, a single fork, and the same old coffee mug I'd used for years. My kitchen had become a shrine to solitude, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of my aging Brooklyn townhouse. I hadn't seen my son, Ethan, in almost a year. Not since the argument that gutted whatever thread of connection we still had. He'd asked for a short-term loan, $500,000, for what he called a can't-miss investment. I'd said no. I'd worked 35 years to build my chain of small but thriving restaurants with my late wife, Caroline, and I wasn't about to gamble it all away. That day, Ethan's voice had been sharp enough to cut steel. Then maybe you're not the father I thought you were. He walked out and never called again. The mug slipped slightly in my wet hands. My gaze drifted to the fridge, to the faded photo of Ethan at his college graduation, Caroline's arm wrapped around his waist, pride radiating from both of them. That was before he'd learned how to manipulate with a smile and a promise. Before money became the measure of our relationship. The phone rang. A sound so rare these days it almost startled me. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, glancing at the caller ID. Ethan. For a long moment, I just stared at his name glowing on the screen. The silence between us felt like a chasm. When I finally picked up, my voice came out rough. Hello. Dad, his tone was tentative, almost boyish. It's me. I sat down slowly, my knees aching from years of long shifts. Ethan. I wasn't expecting. I know. It's been too long. He paused. I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. I've been thinking. I miss you. I miss us. I closed my eyes. The words were exactly what I'd wanted to hear for months. But I'd been around long enough to know people rarely reach out without a reason. What brought this on? He cleared his throat. Sophie, my wife, she's been saying the same thing. We realized how stupid it was to let things fall apart. We want to fix it. Tonight, even. She's making your favorite dinner, Caroline's pot roast. I could almost smell the slow-cooked beef and rosemary. But skepticism prickled at the back of my neck. That's short notice. I know. But. Dad, we've wasted enough time. We moved to Westford last year, beautiful place. Come tonight. 7:30. Just us. Like a family again. I glanced at the photo on the fridge. Caroline's warm smile seemed to whisper, maybe it's time. All right, I said finally. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you, Dad. I'll text you the address. When I hung up, the house felt different, less empty, more charged. Upstairs, I dug out the navy suit Caroline had bought me for Ethan's graduation. The wool was still crisp, the lapels still neat. That suit had seen me through interviews, anniversaries, even her funeral. Tonight it would see me through something else entirely. By 7, I was in an Uber headed toward Westford, watching the streets of Brooklyn give way to clean, sprawling suburbs. The houses grew bigger, lawns manicured to perfection. My driver whistled low as we turned onto a tree-lined road. Must be nice, living out here. When we pulled up to Ethan's address, I froze. The place looked like something out of an architecture magazine. Stone columns, a circular driveway, 2 luxury cars parked in front. I stepped out, smoothing my jacket. Before I could knock, the door opened to reveal Sophie. Elegant, poised, her perfume expensive and cloying. She kissed my cheek, her smile flawless. Alden, you look wonderful. We're so happy you're here. Inside, the house was all marble floors, chandeliers, and curated perfection. Ethan appeared from the dining room, arms open, his hug lingering just a beat too long. It means the world you came, Dad. As I handed him the aged whiskey I'd brought as a peace offering, I told myself this was what reconciliation looked like. This was what family was supposed to be. I had no idea that before the night was over, I'd be running for my life. I told myself I was just overwhelmed. That the world looked a little too bright because I hadn't eaten since noon. That the warmth blooming under my ribs was the comfort of being welcomed, not the whiskey Ethan poured into crystal tumblers with a flourish like a practiced host. We toasted to family, to fresh starts, to Caroline. Sophie added that one with a soft, reverent touch to my sleeve that made me swallow hard. The pot roast scent floated in from somewhere behind a swinging door. Classical music played at precisely the volume people who read lifestyle magazines set it to. Every detail felt curated to lure my shoulders down from around my ears and make me say yes to whatever came after dessert. Dad, you've lost weight, Ethan said, refilling my glass with a generosity he didn't extend when we split checks years earlier. You look sharp. That suit still fits. It's seen better days, I said, patting the lapel as if Caroline were smoothing it for me. But it holds. Sophie laughed, light and musical. So do stories. Ethan tells me you've got a lifetime of them from the restaurants. She tilted her head, performing listening. Tell me about the early days. The early days. My hands knew those better than my tongue, burned knuckles from hot pans, cracked fingertips from slicing case after case of onions, the ache in my arches until the first profitable Friday eased it. I spoke anyway, because stories were the only currency I trusted. I told them about the lease we signed on faith and stubbornness, the week we couldn't afford a dishwasher and washed plates ourselves until sunrise while Caroline counted napkins like they were diamonds. Ethan laughed, genuinely at first, in that boyish way that used to burst out of him before he learned to calculate reactions before having them. Caroline would come home with flower handprints on her jeans, I said, smiling at the memory. She said the smell of yeast and butter was better than perfume. Romantic, Sophie murmured, and I felt the first small wobble in my stomach, not from nostalgia. It wasn't a lurch. It wasn't a spin. It was a slight roll of the floor under my chair as if the ground itself exhaled and took me with it. I set down my glass. The chandelier above me fractured light into 1,000 tidy pieces that didn't quite knit back together. Everything okay? Ethan asked too quickly. He'd always been too quick when he was afraid he'd lost control of a game. Fine, I said, because that's what men my age with sons their age say when they don't know what else to call the new gravity tugging their eyelids down. Sophie's eyes flicked to the bottle. Maybe water with the main course, she suggested to no one in particular, which is the same as speaking directly when you live in houses where requests are obeyed without names attached to them. A quiet woman, housekeeper, appeared and vanished as if she'd been waiting behind the door for that exact line. She moved like someone who'd taught herself how to disappear for a living. We ate. The pot roast tasted familiar in the way a song you've only heard once can feel familiar because of how honestly it was written. They'd used Caroline's recipe, I would have bet a month's profit on it. The rosemary hit the back of my tongue in the exact place it always had, and I had to press my napkin under my eyes under the pretense of a sneeze. Sophie reached out again with that soft, perfectly timed touch. She would have approved, she whispered. Approval. The word sat in my throat like a pit. How are you managing the new location? Ethan asked, casual as weather. Queens Boulevard is a tough strip, right? Tough, I agreed, the room now a degree warmer than a moment ago. But honest. Like the others. We keep our margins tight, hire decent, pay on time. When you say margins, he began, and then disguised the rest by reaching for the pepper mill. Sorry. Habit. Look, I'm fascinated. There's an art to staying afloat. Sophie turned the question into hospitality. We've never been good at, what did you call it, love, real economy businesses. Ethan's in acquisitions. I do the people side. She smiled. Teach us something. I'd taught my son to ride a bike by letting go sooner than he wanted and running beside him until he realized fear and forwards were the same motion. I did not want to teach him tonight. But the warmth under my ribs had grown into a slow tide pushing words out of me that I normally kept locked behind ledger lines. You keep cash buffers, I heard myself saying. You never let anyone, even family, near your operating accounts. You keep your real estate separate from your brand. If something burns, you rebuild from what the fire can't touch. Smart, Ethan said, and tapped his glass against mine a little too hard. It rang. You always were. The wobble returned, stronger. My tongue lagged a half-second behind my thoughts. The chandelier broke into 10,000 perfect fish scales in a river rushing in the wrong direction. Bathroom? I said. Which way? Second door on the left, down the hall, Sophie said quickly, standing halfway as if to guide me, then thinking better of it. Or calculating better of it. I walked the hall by pushing one foot until the tile grabbed it and then dragging the other along behind, the way you do when the floor inside your body is the only one that matters. The art on the walls didn't look like anything, just expensive. At the second door on the left, I paused. If I opened it, I knew what would be inside, a spotless guest bath with hand towels no one ever used and soap that smelled like citrus engineered in a lab. I kept walking. The kitchen was surgical. Stainless steel. A refrigerator that could hold a cow. A bowl of lemons so bright they looked fake, and maybe were. The quiet woman stood at the sink washing two already clean glasses. She didn't look up. That's when I understood, disappearing wasn't a job description for her, it was a survival tactic. Excuse me, I said softly. Back door? She nodded once toward a glass slider. Her hands never stopped moving. If she'd been in a different house, I might have told her thank you with a tone that said more. Here, thank you felt like an invitation to be punished. The night air slapped my face in a way that cleared 10% of the fog. The yard was the kind of yard you don't let children play in because grass that expensive is for looking at. I breathed. Once. Twice. 3 times. The stars over Westford were arranged like a chandelier too, only they were older and harder to manipulate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration made my heart lurch the way a sudden brake lights do on the highway. I slid my finger across the screen without bringing the brightness up. Unknown number. Local area code. Stand up and leave. Now. Say nothing to your son. The words were flat as an EKG gone quiet. No punctuation, no introduction. I read them 3 times because my eyes were moving slower than my fear. Then came another. They dosed your drink. Don't confront. Walk out. I laughed, it came out as a bark. Paranoia thrives where reconciliation blooms. And yet. 2 glasses of whiskey shouldn't have me counting the stars like dollar bills falling through a hole in my pocket. The wobble. The warmth that wasn't warmth. The questions about cash buffers and real estate trusts. I looked back at the house. Through the dining room window, Ethan and Sophie were angled toward each other, not eating, not talking, not moving, only watching the doorway like worshippers facing an altar waiting for a miracle to appear. The phone buzzed again. If you need proof, check your glass under the light. You'll see residue. Don't drink. Leave by the side gate. Rideshare 2 blocks away. Who is this? I typed, hands unsteady enough to substitute letters into strangers. The reply was instant. Someone who cleans up their messes. Go. I wanted to walk back in there and hurl every accusation like a plate onto the tile, watch it shatter into the kind of truth you can't sweep under a rug. But the message had told me exactly what kind of father I'd be if I did that, the kind who tipped the plan back into their hands, the kind who made it easier to say he was confused. Your Honor, he signed willingly. I thought of Caroline's advice, of the night a supplier tried to pass off bad shrimp and she put her body between our line cook and the back door. You can't reason with someone who's chosen deceit, she'd said. You outmove them. I moved. The side gate clicked open like a secret speaking my name. On the dark street, the houses looked identical, brick confidence with black windows for eyes. I ordered a car to the corner. The first time I'd ever used a rideshare app was to go home from Caroline's funeral because I couldn't bear to make any of my friends drive me away from the last place she'd been. Tonight, my thumb hit confirm the way a diver hits water, because the fall is over and now you just pray you remember how to swim. 5 minutes. I walked 3 houses down and sat on the low stone wall of strangers who would never know I'd bled privately on their property. I could feel my pulse in my gums. I could feel my age at the base of my skull like a weight. I could feel the small, mean voice whispering, "This is what you get for wanting too much from a son who learned to measure love in dollar signs." Headlights. I stood too quickly and had to grip a hedgerow to keep the sky from tipping into my lap. The driver didn't ask why a man in a navy suit climbed in on a quiet suburban street without luggage. New York trains you not to ask questions unless you want a role in the answers. "Brooklyn," he said. "Brooklyn," I said, then changed my mind as the car pulled away. "Drive until we hit the highway. Then I'll tell you if I need to get out." He shrugged. The jazz on his radio was a horn holding one long note over a chord that shifted beneath it, a stubborn thread refusing to fall. My phone glowed again. The unknown number. I answered. "I'm listening," I said. The voice on the other end was careful, genderless when wrapped in whisper. "Don't go back." "Who are you?" "A person who's been invisible long enough to see what visible people hide." A small pause. "They crushed a pill into your drink. It makes alcohol 5 times stronger and erases lines between consent and suggestion. They planned to have you sign transfer papers while you were agreeable." My throat went so dry it hurt to swallow. Papers. Power of attorney. Business assets. A clean sweep, Alden. The voice knew my name. A chill argued with the heat still uncoiling in my chest. "They practiced your signature." I closed my eyes. In my head, Ethan was 6 again, writing his name on the fogged window of our first restaurant with the corner of his mitten, proud enough of the E that he drew it twice. "How do you know?" "Because I empty the shredder," the voice said simply. "Because I live between the rooms where people make messes and the bins where they pretend messes die." "Why warn me?" A breath. Then, "Because you say please and thank you. Because I saw your hands shake when you touched your wife's name in your wallet photo, and people who shake like that don't deserve what's coming." The driver glanced up in the rearview at the sound of my breath breaking. I turned my face to the window and let the cool glass rearrange me. "They're desperate," the voice said. "Debt desperate. And desperate people pull family down first because family forgives longest." "Not tonight," I whispered, not sure who I was telling, myself, the driver, the stranger who had pulled me out of my life like a hook from a fish's cheek. "Not if you keep going," the voice said. "Do not turn around. Do not answer Ethan. He will say anything, cry, swear, promise. He will talk about your wife. He will make you feel like a monster for leaving. Let him." We crossed under a streetlight and the car's shadow leapt over us like a dancer. My phone vibrated with a new message, Ethan, then another, Sophie, then a third, I didn't have the strength to look at. "Someone needs to tell the police," I said. "I did," the voice replied. "But evidence disappears in houses with cleaners." "You," I said softly. "Yes," the voice admitted. Not proud, not ashamed. Just true. I can't talk more. They watch. But don't go back. The line went quiet. I let it be. The driver said nothing. The jazz's long note finally broke into a run of smaller notes that felt like rain after a pressure headache. I thought of Caroline's cologne bottle still on the dresser, the way I refused to move it because dust looks like an accusation when it lands on memory. I thought of the single mug I washed each night, and how I'd rinsed it like a prayer. I thought of Ethan's arms around me at the door, a hug that tried too hard to pull me into the center of a play where my part had already been written. Brooklyn Bridge lights shrugged themselves across the water like a shawl. I could tell the driver to keep going, to pour me back into my house and lock the door and pretend the last 2 hours had been a fever dream misfiring on a night I wanted too much. But pretending is how you get poisoned twice. "Sir," the driver said, gentle. "Where to?" I held Caroline's photo in my mind and asked a question I never imagined asking about my own child. "What happens," I said aloud, "when the person you love most decides the easiest way to survive is to make sure you don't?" The driver didn't answer. He couldn't. The windshield filled with city like a chest fills with breath you're not sure you deserve anymore. I opened my phone. I typed a message to a number I'd never saved before but would never forget now. "Thank you." No reply came. It didn't need to. My finger hovered over Ethan's name until my vision blurred. I didn't call. I didn't text. I did something a younger version of me would have called cowardice and an older version of me now recognized as strategy. "Change of plan," I told the driver, voice steadying on the truth as if it were a banister. "We're going back." He looked at me, surprised, a question tucked behind his eyes. "I'm not going alone," I said. "I'm going with help." He nodded once and took the exit that would get us there faster. The night breathed. The city opened. And the ache inside my ribs settled into something that felt suspiciously like resolve. The dispatcher's voice on the other end of the 911 call was all clipped precision, but I could tell they'd heard enough family betrayals to know this wasn't going to be a welfare check, it was going to be a case file. "Sir, you're saying your son and daughter-in-law attempted to drug you for the purpose of obtaining legal control of your business assets?" "That's correct." My voice was low but steady, like reciting a recipe I'd memorized years ago. The drink was laced with something that made 2 glasses feel like 6. "There are prepared documents, power of attorney, asset transfers. They were ready to make me sign." The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking for addresses, suspect descriptions, the make and color of the vehicles parked outside. I told them everything. They told me to wait for marked units to converge on the location before I approached. 20 minutes, they said. 20 minutes to sit in the back of an Uber with my thoughts racing ahead of me like runners before a storm. The driver, quiet man in his 40s, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if gauging whether he was transporting a victim or a vigilante. When we reached a side street near Ethan's mansion, I saw the first unmarked cruiser roll by, lights off, followed by another with headlights dimmed. The officers inside didn't even glance our way, but I felt the air tighten around us, charged like the moment before a summer lightning strike. I stepped out, my shoes crunching against the pristine gravel of a driveway I no longer associated with reconciliation. In my jacket pocket, Caroline's photo was warm from my hand, the edges worn soft from years of holding. "You can't run from this," she seemed to say. "Not now." The police moved into position with a choreography I'd only seen in movies. 2 at the front, 1 circling the back. The plan was simple: I'd walk up, keep Ethan and Sophie engaged, and buy the officers time to enter and secure whatever evidence they could find before it disappeared. As I approached the door, my phone buzzed again. It was the same unknown number, the voice from the rideshare. They hid the documents in Ethan's office, second drawer on the right, under a false bottom. "And there's a bottle of white powder in Sophie's vanity drawer, same drug they used on you. If the cops find it, the case is airtight." I typed back, "Why help me this much?" The reply came before I'd even finished the thought, "Because they don't deserve to do this to anyone else. And because I've seen too many good men broken by people they trust." I didn't need to ask who it was anymore. Only one person had been close enough to overhear, close enough to see, and invisible enough to stay alive doing it, Maria, the housekeeper. The oak door opened before I could knock. Ethan filled the frame, wearing that strained, too wide smile he used when his poker bluff was unraveling. "Dad! You're back, what happened?" "Sophie's been worried sick." Behind him, Sophie's face appeared, framed by perfect curls and perfect makeup that didn't quite hide the flicker of alarm in her eyes. I stepped inside, careful to keep my own expression flat. "Thought I'd left something here." "What?" Ethan asked, just a fraction too quickly. "An appetite," I said evenly, and watched the relief twitch at the corner of his mouth before he masked it. As they ushered me back toward the dining room, I scanned the house like I was seeing it for the first time, not as a guest, but as someone who finally knew what every piece of the set was hiding behind its polished veneer. The way Sophie kept herself between me and the hallway to the bedrooms. The way Ethan kept glancing toward the study door like a gambler eyeing the chips he still thought he could win back. The dining room looked exactly as I'd left it, minus the glasses and plates. Too neat. Too staged. Sophie slipped into a hostess role again. "Why don't we pour you another drink, Anne?" "Not tonight," I said. "I'm here for something else." Ethan's smile faltered. "What's that?" "Truth." It was subtle at first, the almost imperceptible shift in posture, the tightening around his jaw. But in that instant, I saw it, the calculation flicker in his eyes, the mental tally of what he still had to lose and how quickly he'd have to move to keep it. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Do you really think Caroline would have forgiven this?" Sophie's lips parted, but no sound came out. That was the moment the front door burst open. Officers moved in with a speed that didn't give them time to hide anything, sweeping through the foyer, the dining room, the hallway. Ethan shot to his feet. "What the hell is this?" "Sit down," one of the officers ordered. Another disappeared into the study. Minutes later, he emerged holding a stack of legal documents and a plastic evidence bag containing a small white bottle. Ethan's face went pale. Sophie's chair screeched across the marble as she backed away. The senior officer looked at me. "Sir, we've found exactly what you described. And more." I let out a slow breath. My suspicions weren't suspicions anymore, they were facts, wrapped in latex gloves and chain of custody tags. Ethan tried one last time, his voice trembling. "Dad, whatever you think this is, it's not." But I'd already stopped listening. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was conspiracy. And now, I finally had proof. The front door had barely clicked shut behind the officers when the echo of their boots faded into a silence so sharp it could cut. Ethan sat hunched in the armchair opposite me, hands cuffed in front of him, his expensive watch slipping down his wrist. Sophie had been separated into the sitting room, where I could hear the occasional muffled burst of her voice, pleading, bargaining, spinning her own version of events to anyone who'd listen. The police had taken the evidence they needed and left 2 plainclothes detectives behind to keep the scene secure until the paperwork was finalized. One of them, Detective Rowan, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching Ethan the way a hunter watches something already caught in the snare. "You'll want to get your ducks in a row, Mr. Hale," Rowan said quietly. "The DA's going to move on this fast, but it's cleaner if you've locked down your assets before they start sniffing around." I nodded. "I've got accounts he doesn't know about. Real estate in my name only. But I'm not just thinking about me anymore." Rowan's brow lifted slightly. "You thinking about who else he might target?" I thought of Maria, still technically their employee, the one who had risked everything to get me out of that dining room alive. The one who had overheard every damning word and yet stayed invisible enough to survive in a house built on lies. If Ethan suspected her involvement, he wouldn't hesitate to make her life hell. When the detectives left, I didn't go home. I called my attorney from the driveway, my voice stripped down to business. Lock everything. Freeze every account that's got my name on it. Nobody signs a damn thing unless I'm in the room. And I want the locks changed at every property before morning. She didn't ask why. That's what you pay a good lawyer for. They hear the storm in your tone and start building you a roof. I also called the managers of each restaurant location, telling them to pull any access Ethan might still have, passwords, keys, vendor accounts. If he shows up, I said, you don't let him past the host stand. Call me and call the police. But asset protection wasn't enough. If I wanted to make sure this never circled back, I had to burn whatever bridges Ethan thought he still had left. That meant exposing him, fully, to people he feared more than he feared prison. The voice from earlier, Maria, had told me about the gambling debts, the loan sharks. That kind of desperation didn't come from losing poker night with the neighbors. It came from sitting at tables where the buy-in could pay for a house and the penalty for folding wasn't losing chips, it was losing kneecaps. I found the number Maria had called from and sent a single message, need to meet. Off their property. Safe place. The reply came in under a minute, there's a coffee shop on Birch Avenue. Back corner. 10 a.m. tomorrow. It was nearly midnight now. My suit still smelled faintly of Sophie's perfume, layered over the cold metal scent of handcuffs from when the officers had led Ethan away for questioning before releasing him on bail. That was a temporary fix. I needed something permanent. Before leaving Westford, I made one last stop. The side gate creaked under my hand as I stepped into the garden, retracing the path I'd taken to escape hours earlier. I stood there a moment, the night air colder now, staring at the sliding glass door where Maria had wordlessly pointed me toward freedom. You saved my life, I murmured into the dark, even though she wasn't there to hear it. The next morning, the coffee shop was half empty, the smell of burnt espresso masking the faint scent of rain on the street. Maria was already in the corner, her hair pulled back, hands wrapped around a paper cup. She looked smaller without the black dress uniform, but her eyes, steady, unflinching, were the same. They're going to come after you, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. If not for revenge, then to keep you quiet. She shrugged. I've been quiet for years. Doesn't mean I don't know how to speak when it matters. You're going to speak, I said. To the police, to my lawyer, to anyone who needs to hear it. And in exchange, I'm going to make sure you're never in their orbit again. Her brows knit. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a way out, I corrected. Manager position at my newest restaurant. Full benefits, good pay, and no one breathing down your neck for anything except the lunch rush. For the first time, her composure cracked, just a little. Why? Because you saw what they were, and you still chose to help me. That's worth more than loyalty bought with blood ties. She nodded slowly. All right. But there's something you need to know if you're serious about ending this. I leaned forward. Go on. They weren't just planning to take your restaurants. Ethan was already in talks to sell them, at a fraction of their value, to a shell company run by one of his creditors. Once they had your signature, it would have been over in hours. By the time you woke up, everything would have been gone. You wouldn't even have a case. It hit me like a punch. This wasn't just theft. This was obliteration. Do you know the name of the company? I asked. She reached into her bag and slid me a folded slip of paper. I wrote it down the night I heard them. I didn't want to keep it in the house. The name on the paper was one I recognized, not from any restaurant business, but from headlines about federal investigations. The kind of name that made accountants nervous and prosecutors salivate. I folded the paper carefully, tucking it into my wallet. This wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. This was about taking a scalpel to whatever cancer Ethan had let into his life and making sure it never came near mine again. And if that meant aligning myself with people who wanted to see him fail for their own reasons, so be it. The difference between revenge and justice, I realized, was timing. And I was about to make my timing perfect. By the time I left the coffee shop, my mind was moving like a chess clock, each piece snapping into place faster than I could breathe. The slip of paper Maria had given me felt heavy in my wallet, as if the ink itself carried weight. That shell company's name wasn't just leverage, it was dynamite, and I intended to light the fuse. First call was to my lawyer, Colleen. "I need you to run a deep dive on a company called Franklin Arc Holdings," I told her. There was a pause. Franklin Arc? Alden, that's not the kind of outfit you want breathing down your neck. Exactly, I said. And that's who Ethan was about to sell my restaurants to. Find everything: corporate filings, offshore accounts, ties to known entities. And while you're at it, start drafting a civil suit against my son and his wife for attempted fraud and poisoning. Colleen didn't ask for details, she'd already read enough between the lines the night before. Next, I called Detective Rowan. "I've got a lead you'll want," I told him. Name of the buyer Ethan had lined up. Rowan's voice sharpened. "Send it over. We've had them on our radar for a while, but nothing stuck. If we can tie your son to them directly." "That's the plan," I said. "But I need you to play this right. No premature moves. I want him to think he's safe until the very last second." Understood. That night, I sat in my study with Caroline's photo propped against the lamp. "You always said the best revenge is the one they never see coming," I murmured. "So let's make this one count." I started by leaning into Ethan's ego. I sent him a text. "Glad the police understood this was just a misunderstanding. We should talk soon." It was bait, pure and simple. And like most arrogant men, he couldn't resist a hook if it looked like an olive branch. He replied within minutes. "Agreed. Maybe we can work something out. Lunch tomorrow?" "Perfect," I whispered. The next day, we met at a high-end steakhouse in the city. He arrived in a tailored suit, all smiles, like the man who had once hugged me at the door was just a bad dream. "Dad," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I'm glad you reached out. I think we both said things we didn't mean." I let him believe I was here to negotiate. I even ordered the whiskey, untouched, so he'd think I was letting my guard down. He started talking about rebuilding trust, about collaborating on future opportunities. And that's when I gave him exactly what he wanted to hear. "I've been thinking about retirement," I said casually, cutting into my steak. "Maybe it's time I hand the reins to family. With the right paperwork, of course." I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He thought I'd softened. He thought the scare had worked. "I'm glad you're open to that," he said smoothly. "We could structure it in a way that benefits everyone." "That's what I want," I replied, sliding my napkin across my lap. "Something mutually beneficial." What I didn't tell him was that every word of our conversation was being recorded by the tiny device in my breast pocket, and that the mutually beneficial structure I had in mind involved him walking directly into a trap. 2 days later, Colleen called with an update on Franklin Arc Holdings. "It's worse than I thought," she said. "They're under federal investigation for money laundering, tax fraud, and, get this, ties to illegal gambling operations in 3 states. The pieces locked together. Ethan's debts, his desperation, the rushed plan to get my signature, it all traced back to Franklin Arc. If I could hand that connection to the right people, he wouldn't just face state charges. He'd be staring down federal prison." That night, I met with Rowan in an unmarked car parked 2 blocks from my house. I gave him the recording of my lunch with Ethan, the documents Maria had overheard him discussing, and Colleen's research on Franklin Arc. "This is enough to get the feds involved," Rowan said, thumbing through the papers. "If we time it right, we can hit him on both fronts, state and federal." "Time it," I said. "I want him thinking he's in control until the cuffs go on." Rowan grinned. You might get your wish. Over the next week, I played my part perfectly. I took Ethan's calls. I entertained his plans. I even let him draft a new version of the transfer papers, knowing they'd go straight into evidence. And all the while, Rowan kept me updated. Franklin Ark had been quietly looped into the investigation. The feds were watching. Every move Ethan made now was under a microscope. The night before the hammer was set to drop, I got one last call from Maria. "They're celebrating tonight," she said. "They think you're signing tomorrow." "Good," I replied. "Tell them I'll be there. I want them smiling when the floor drops out." The morning of the signing, I woke before sunrise. I dressed deliberately, navy suit, polished shoes, the same outfit I'd worn the night they tried to take everything. This time, though, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was carrying one. Rowan's instructions had been clear: keep them talking until the signal. The FBI would be staged a block away, waiting for the state team's green light. The two agencies weren't just cooperating, they were competing for the pleasure of bringing Franklin Ark Holdings down. And Ethan was their bridge into the company's inner circle. The drive to Westford was quiet. I kept Caroline's photo in my breast pocket, my fingers brushing it every time my mind started drifting toward doubt. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for the woman who'd built our life from nothing and for every honest person I'd employed over the years. Sophie greeted me at the door with a champagne glass already in hand. "Alden," she said, her smile as glossy as her lipstick. "You're right on time. Ethan's in the study, he has the papers ready." I followed her down the marble hallway, every step echoing like a countdown. Ethan stood behind the desk, grinning like a man who'd just beaten the odds at the table. "Dad," he said warmly, "I'm glad we're doing this the civilized way." I sat, deliberately placing my hands on the desk where he could see them, an old negotiation trick. "You have the documents?" He slid them across with a Mont Blanc pen resting neatly on top. The papers were thick, full transfer of business ownership, power of attorney, even a clause that gave him control of my real estate holdings. I flipped through them slowly, pretending to read every line, while my mind counted the seconds until Rowan's team moved in. "You've thought of everything," I said finally, meeting his eyes. "I learned from the best," he replied, puffing his chest. That was when I saw it, the tiniest bead of sweat at his temple. Confidence in Ethan was never perfect, it always had a hairline crack. I picked up the pen, turned it in my fingers, and then set it down. "You know, before I sign, there's one thing I want to make sure of." "What's that?" His voice was a shade too tight. "That Franklin Ark Holdings is going to pay you enough to make this worth losing me as a father." The color drained from his face. "What did you just say?" I said, I leaned forward, "that I know exactly who you're selling to. And so do the people waiting outside." For a split second, he froze, then his eyes darted toward the window. And right on cue, the wail of sirens split the air. Sophie's glass shattered on the marble. "Ethan, what's happening?" The front door burst open. First came the state officers, guns drawn, voices sharp, hands where we can see them. Seconds later, the FBI swept in behind, their windbreakers a sea of block letters. "Ethan Hale," one agent barked, "you're under arrest for attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and interstate racketeering in connection with Franklin Ark Holdings." Two agents moved to cuff Sophie as she sputtered about being just a bystander. Another agent slid the stack of documents into an evidence bag. Ethan's voice cracked. "Dad, you don't understand, these people." "I understand perfectly," I said, standing. "You were about to trade everything I built for a payoff from a criminal syndicate. And you thought you could poison me into making it legal." They read him his rights, but his protests were drowned out by the chaos of agents swarming the study, cataloging evidence, photographing every inch. As they led him past me, his eyes locked on mine. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance there, I saw fear. Not of prison. Of what Franklin Ark might do when they realized he couldn't deliver. He opened his mouth like he was about to beg. I turned away. In the foyer, Rowan caught my eye. You just made a lot of people in law enforcement very happy. I didn't do it for them, I said. I did it for Caroline. And for myself. Outside, cameras were already flashing. News vans idled at the curb. The whole neighborhood was watching the golden couple of Westford get loaded into unmarked SUVs. I walked down the driveway slowly, breathing in the cold air. For the first time in months, my head felt clear. Tomorrow, the headlines would make Ethan and Sophie infamous. But tonight, I'd finally get a full night's sleep, knowing the game was over, and I'd won. By the time the last SUV pulled away, Westford was quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows after a storm has ripped through and left nothing standing but the truth. I stayed behind just long enough to walk the empty halls of Ethan's mansion one last time. Without their designer coats draped over chairs, without Sophie's perfume hanging in the air, the place felt cold, more like a museum than a home. Every chandelier, every marble tile, every imported vase was a reminder of how far he'd strayed from the values Caroline and I had raised him with. In the study, the desk where he'd slid those documents across to me sat bare, the faint imprint of the pen still pressed into the blotter. That pen had almost signed away my life's work. Now, it was just another piece of evidence locked away in an evidence bag. Maria was waiting outside when I stepped onto the driveway. She looked smaller without the black uniform, but her eyes carried something I recognized, relief. "It's over," I told her. "I heard," she said quietly. "The agents came through the kitchen first. They were thorough." I reached into my jacket and handed her a plain white envelope. "Your new contract. Manager at my Crown Heights location. Salary, benefits, and something Caroline would have insisted on, a share of the profits." She blinked hard, swallowing back what might have been tears. "You don't have to do this." "I do," I said. "Because you chose to do the right thing when it could have cost you everything. That's the kind of person I want standing next to me." Her hand shook as she took the envelope. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." I smiled. "Alden. We're not in that house anymore." As I drove back to Brooklyn, my phone buzzed with updates from Colleen and Detective Rowan. The state was moving quickly. The federal charges were piling up. Franklin Ark Holdings had been blindsided. Apparently, they hadn't expected their golden conduit to be arrested mid-deal. The company's accounts were already being scrutinized, and the indictments would follow. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water, no whiskey, no champagne. Just water, clear and honest. Caroline's photo leaned against the salt shaker, her smile as steady as ever. "You'd have been proud of today," I said to the empty room. "Not because I won, but because I didn't let them take who I am." Ethan hadn't called from jail, and I didn't expect him to. Whatever plea deal his lawyer was working on, it wouldn't erase what he tried to do. I wasn't sure yet if I'd ever visit him in prison. Forgiveness might come one day, but trust? That was gone for good. The next morning, Maria showed up at the restaurant 20 minutes early, dressed in a crisp button-down and ready to work. Watching her greet the staff like they were already her team, I realized something: this was what legacy really meant. Not bloodlines. Not names on paper. But passing what you've built into hands that will protect it. The papers Ethan had tried to shove under my pen were now in the possession of the DA's office, marked Exhibit A. The poison they'd tried to hide was logged and tested. And the name Franklin Ark Holdings was lighting up the desks of prosecutors across 3 states. In the end, justice didn't just mean seeing my son in cuffs, it meant knowing no one else would be hurt by his desperation. And as I locked up that night, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, betrayal leaves scars, but because I'd chosen the fight. And I'd won. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.